The wind whispered through the ancient pines, carrying with it a scent of pine resin and the faint echo of forgotten days. In the depths of the forest, where sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, a lone figure moved silently. Her steps were measured, careful, as though the very earth beneath her feet demanded a pact of secrecy. She had been running from a life that had never truly accepted her, a life that had branded her as unwanted, cast her aside because she dared to exist as an Omega in a world that only revered the Alpha. It had been 10 years since she disappeared from the village, since the rejection had pierced her heart with a pain so deep that she swore never to return. Memories of that night, when the villagers' eyes had glimmered with disdain and the Alpha Council had declared her unworthy, came unbidden, ghost-like. She had packed nothing, only what she could carry in her small hands, and fled, swallowed by the forest that had always promised solace, if not safety. The forest had become her sanctuary. It had taught her the language of the wind, the rhythm of the rivers, and the secrets of the animals that lived in quiet harmony with nature. She had learned to survive not as a member of society, but as a solitary being who belonged only to herself. The passing years had carved her into someone both stronger and softer, a paradox shaped by isolation. And yet, even in her solitude, the shadows of her past sometimes stretched long and dark, reminding her of the life she had forsaken and the family she had never truly known. She paused at the edge of a moss-covered clearing, inhaling the earthy scent that had become her constant companion. Her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the surroundings. Despite the isolation, she felt a presence, subtle, lingering, and impossible to ignore. It was a feeling she had long ago learned to trust. The forest never lied. And neither did instinct. Back in the village, the story of her disappearance had become a cautionary tale whispered among the young, a legend distorted by time. Yet, in the halls of the Alpha King's court, her name was remembered differently. Not as an Omega who failed, but as the one the king had watched vanish with his own disbelief, the one who had left a mark he could never forget. And while years had passed, the memory of her touch, the glimpse of her defiance, and the spark that refused to bend had haunted him relentlessly, turning into a silent obsession. The sun began its slow descent, casting the forest in hues of gold and amber. Shadows stretched long and thin, and the wind carried the faint sound of running water nearby. She approached the stream cautiously, lowering herself to the edge to drink. The water was cold, crisp, and refreshing, a stark contrast to the memories that burned hotter with each passing year. And yet, as she lifted her gaze to the trees above, she felt a tremor, an unfamiliar ripple through the calm she had built around herself. Somewhere, far beyond the forest's embrace, a storm was coming. Not of wind or rain, but of fate. She could not know it yet, for she had spent a decade believing the world had abandoned her. She had convinced herself that the past held nothing for her but shadows. But fate has a way of moving quietly, unnoticed, until it bursts forth with a force that can neither be ignored nor escaped. And so, she remained by the stream, her reflection fractured by the rippling water, unaware that a decade of silence was about to be broken, that the Alpha King who had once watched her vanish with powerless eyes would soon find her. For 10 years, the forest had been her only companion, its dense foliage her shield and the soft rustle of leaves her lullaby. She had learned to move like the shadows themselves, silent and patient, blending into the greenery as if she were part of the very land. Time in the forest was different, it flowed not in days or months, but in the rise and fall of the sun, the shifting patterns of the seasons, and the rhythms of life that spoke in whispers rather than shouts. She had built herself a sanctuary, a small hollow beneath the roots of a massive oak, where sunlight filtered through in gentle streams. Moss carpeted the floor, and wildflowers nodded in approval at her presence. Birds had grown accustomed to her voice, their songs becoming a familiar chorus to her otherwise solitary existence. She had learned which berries were safe, which streams offered the purest water, and which paths could lead her to shelter when storms raged. Life in the forest was not easy, but it was honest, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to be truly free. Yet freedom came at a price. Loneliness had a way of sinking into her bones, a persistent ache that even the beauty of the forest could not soothe. She would sometimes sit on the edge of the cliffs that overlooked the valley below, staring into the distance, imagining the world she had left behind. Faces would emerge in her mind, the sneers of villagers, the cold eyes of the Alpha Council, and, strangely, the haunting memory of the Alpha King himself. He had been powerful, unyielding, and frighteningly composed. And yet, there had been a moment, a fleeting instant, when his gaze had faltered, betraying something beneath the iron armor of his authority. Those memories both pained and intrigued her. She had fled because she could not endure the scorn, yet part of her had never stopped wondering if he had truly understood her, if he had seen her for what she was, not what society demanded she be. But such thoughts were dangerous in the solitude she had embraced. They brought longing and vulnerability, companions she had long since decided were luxuries she could ill afford. Her days were spent gathering food, tending to her small garden of wild herbs, and observing the creatures of the forest. She had developed a rhythm with the land, a silent understanding that was as comforting as it was essential. Wolves, foxes, and deer moved alongside her with a trust that humans had never offered. She had named them in whispers, creating bonds that were invisible yet profound. Through them, she felt a connection to life, to the pulse of the earth, and to the untamed energy that had always coursed through her veins. But not every day was serene. Storms would lash against her small sanctuary, rattling the hollow and tearing branches from the trees. Nights were filled with unfamiliar sounds that made her heart race, calls of distant predators, the snap of twigs under unseen feet, the groan of the earth shifting. Each challenge reminded her of her own fragility, yet also of her resilience. Each night survived was a testament to her strength, a silent vow to continue, no matter the cost. And then, as the 10th year drew toward its close, the forest seemed to change subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. The winds carried a new scent, unfamiliar yet commanding. Birds, usually fearless, took flight with anxious cries. Even the small deer that often grazed near her hollow approached cautiously, their ears flicking toward sounds she could not yet hear. A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of premonition. Something was coming, something that would shatter the quiet she had built around herself. She could not see it, not yet, but instinct warned her. The forest, her lifelong confidant, had sensed it first. And though she had spent a decade believing the outside world had forgotten her, that it had moved on without care or memory, the forest reminded her that some forces, once set in motion, cannot be restrained. Some destinies, no matter how deeply hidden, have a way of finding their mark. That night, as she lay under the protective canopy of ancient branches, listening to the soft sigh of the wind, she felt it, the subtle disturbance, the shift in the rhythm of the world around her. Her pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from a spark of anticipation she had long denied herself. Something was coming, something that would pierce her solitude, awaken old memories, and challenge everything she had built in these 10 years. And somewhere far away, beyond forests and mountains, the Alpha King stirred as well. The memory of the Omega who had vanished without a trace had never faded. The years of searching, of longing, of regret, had worn heavily on him, and now, an intuition he could not ignore drew him ever closer to the shadows of the forest where she hid. The threads of fate were weaving together once more, quietly, inexorably. And in the stillness of the night, as the forest held its breath, both hunter and hunted, though time had changed them in ways, the first light of dawn filtered through the towering pines, scattering golden beams across the forest floor. Mist curled lazily around moss-covered stones, and the faint gurgle of a hidden stream whispered secrets only the forest could understand. She woke to the familiar sounds, her senses already alert, honed by a decade of solitude. Every rustle, every shift in the wind, every distant call of a bird was carefully noted, catalogued, and understood. Yet today, the air carried a subtle difference, an underlying tension that made her skin prickle. She moved through the undergrowth with quiet grace, her feet finding paths hidden to those untrained in the forest's ways. Her home, the hollow beneath the great oak, was tucked away from sight, but even as she checked its perimeter and ensured its safety, unease tugged at her heart. She had spent 10 years in this forest, building walls of solitude stronger than any stone fortress, yet now, a tremor of anticipation unsettled her. Something beyond her understanding was approaching, and though she could not yet see it, the forest itself seemed to recognize the shift. Memories came unbidden, like flickering shadows at the edge of her mind. She remembered the cold rejection, the whispered accusations, the fear in the eyes of those who had once called her neighbor. She remembered the night she fled, clutching nothing but determination and the fragile hope that the forest would protect her. And she remembered him who had watched her leave, the Alpha King whose gaze had both terrified and fascinated her. He had been her enemy in the eyes of society, yet in that brief encounter, she had glimpsed something unexpected. A flicker of understanding, a hesitation that had confused her young heart. Those memories had faded over the years, softened by survival and distance, but now they surged back with a force that startled her. It was as if the past, long buried beneath layers of leaves and time, was reaching out to her again, pulling her toward a reckoning she had never imagined. She paused beside the stream, kneeling to cup the clear, cold water in her hands. Her reflection wavered in the ripples, revealing a woman both familiar and changed, strong, wary, and yet undeniably marked by solitude. The forest had shaped her, yes, but it had not erased the essence of who she was. The Omega who had fled, the one the world had rejected, still lived beneath the layers of resilience. And beneath that, something else stirred, an emotion she had suppressed, buried beneath 10 years of survival. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to grow more restless. Birds scattered in sudden flocks, small creatures disappeared into hidden burrows, and the wind carried whispers that made her pause repeatedly. Her instincts, finely tuned by years of living among shadows, screamed that she was not alone. And then she sensed it, a presence. Strong, commanding, unmistakable. An alpha. Her heart skipped, but not in fear. In the years she had survived the forest, she had learned that instinct was rarely wrong. And yet, the realization brought an unexpected surge of emotion, a mixture of apprehension, curiosity, and something she refused to name even to herself. The presence was deliberate, purposeful, and not of the wild. Someone had entered her sanctuary, someone whose steps could not be mistaken for the ordinary creatures of the forest. Far beyond the trees, the Alpha King's journey had led him closer to the forest's edge. His years of rule, of endless decisions and burdens, had not dulled the memory of the Omega who had vanished before his eyes. Each year, each passing season, had only intensified his longing and regret. Now, he moved with careful determination, guided by fragments of instinct and memory, knowing that the one he sought was near, yet elusive. The forest seemed to recognize his approach, as if even nature itself understood the gravity of the encounter that was about to unfold. Leaves rustled without wind, shadows deepened in unexpected corners, and every animal seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The Omega, attuned to the subtlest shifts, sensed it too, her pulse quickening as though the forest itself were warning her of the storm to come. She crouched behind a thick cluster of ferns, peering toward a clearing where sunlight met shadow, heart-hammering with a mixture of caution and an unbidden curiosity. She had spent 10 years here, learning to rely on herself, building a world where no one could hurt her again. And yet, the presence before her, a force she could feel but not yet see, stirred emotions she thought she had left behind. For the first time since she had vanished, she felt the weight of the past pressing down upon her, and with it, the knowledge that life beyond the forest was returning. It came not with malice nor threat, but with inevitability. The years of solitude, the pain of rejection, the lessons of survival, they had all led to this moment. And as the wind carried the faintest trace of a familiar scent, she realized that the life she had tried to leave behind was ready to confront her once more. Somewhere in the distance, the Alpha King paused. His senses, sharpened by years of leadership and unrelenting pursuit, had caught the subtle signs of her presence. He did not speak, did not call, for he knew that the forest demanded patience, that destiny moved with its own rhythm. And though a decade had passed since he had last seen her, he could feel it, the undeniable truth that she was here, alive, and waiting, whether she knew it or not. The forest held its breath. Shadows lengthened, and in the silence between heartbeat and heartbeat, past and present, two lives, once intertwined by fate and shattered by circumstance, edged closer to a reunion that would change everything. The forest had grown quiet, unnaturally so, as though it, too, were holding its breath. The birds had fallen silent, their songs replaced by the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a wind that carried more than just the scent of pine and earth. There was a presence here now, subtle, commanding, impossible to ignore, and she could feel it in the very marrow of her bones. Her senses, sharpened by 10 years of solitude, flared like a wildfire at the edge of her awareness. She moved through the undergrowth with practiced ease, her bare feet brushing against soft moss and hidden roots. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Her body, lean from years of survival, had grown silent in motion. She had become one with the forest, its whispers, its shadows, its secret pathways. And yet, despite her mastery, a shiver ran down her spine. Something was different this time, an energy she could neither name nor dismiss. Hours earlier, she had caught the faintest hint of it, a movement just beyond the veil of trees, a scent carried on the wind that was both unfamiliar and oddly familiar. It had not yet revealed itself fully, but it had stirred memories long buried. Memories of the village she had fled, of the judgmental eyes that had turned against her, and of the Alpha King, whose presence had once left an indelible mark on her young heart. She had not seen him in 10 years, yet instinct whispered that the force approaching was him. Far beyond the forest's edge, the Alpha King moved with a predator's grace, his eyes scanning, calculating, feeling every nuance of the land. He had tracked countless enemies, navigated endless dangers, yet none had occupied his mind as persistently as the Omega who had vanished without a trace a decade ago. Each year, each passing season, had deepened the ache of absence. And now, finally, the threads of destiny had led him here. He did not speak. His voice, accustomed to command, remained silent, for he knew that the forest demanded respect. He could sense her presence before he could see her. The air shifted subtly around him, the smallest disturbance in the patterns of life betraying her location. His heart, trained to conceal emotion, betrayed a rare stir of anticipation. It was not just desire or longing, it was recognition. After 10 long years, he would finally see her again. Meanwhile, she had found a vantage point atop a rocky incline, hidden from sight, her sharp eyes scanning the dense foliage below. She had learned to trust the forest, to read its signals as easily as reading the wind on a clear day. And the forest was whispering now, warning her of the approach of a presence she could not yet fully comprehend. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from a long-forgotten spark, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and something far more complex that she refused to name even in thought. She recalled the first time she had seen him, the day she had been rejected. His gaze had been impossibly calm, yet she had sensed a storm beneath the surface, a force she could neither evade nor challenge. He had been authority and danger wrapped in one, and even as a young Omega, she had felt that his presence carried a weight unlike any other. She had fled then, choosing exile over submission, and had vowed never to allow him, or anyone, to wield power over her again. And yet, here he was. Closer than she had ever imagined, stepping silently into the sanctuary she had created for herself. Her body tensed, instincts sharpening. The air itself seemed to vibrate with his nearness, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt the undeniable pull of the past threading into her present. The Alpha King moved with a precision born of years of leadership and battle. Every step was deliberate, yet careful, for he knew the forest concealed dangers that were invisible to the untrained eye. But his focus was not on the perils, it was on her. He had followed the faint trail left by memory and instinct, piecing together the puzzle of where she might have gone. And now, after a decade of searching, he could feel it, she was near. Time seemed to stretch in the forest, each moment elongated by tension and anticipation. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of an unseen bird, the whisper of wind through the pines, all became amplified in her awareness. She crouched behind a thick copse of ferns, muscles coiled, eyes narrowing as she caught sight of movement in the distance. The silhouette was unmistakable, tall, commanding, impossible to ignore. Her breath caught, and yet she did not flee. Part of her, a part she had long buried beneath years of survival and solitude, wanted to see him, to understand why fate had brought him here, now, after all this time. He paused, as if sensing her gaze. The forest seemed to shift around them both, the tension palpable, almost electric. Neither spoke, yet a conversation flowed between them without words. 10 years of separation, 10 years of silence, hung heavily in the air. And in that quiet, unspoken exchange, the weight of everything left unsaid pressed against them both. For the first time in a decade, the forest no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the stage for a reckoning long deferred. She could feel her pulse against the stillness, the rhythm of her heartbeat echoing the gravity of the moment. And he, too, felt it, the pull of destiny, the undeniable connection that had not been broken by time, distance, or rejection. The forest held its breath, the shadows deepened, and in the silence of anticipation, the first step toward reunion had begun. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that the moment of convergence had finally arrived. Light filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, where every leaf, branch, and stone seemed to carry the weight of anticipation. She crouched low behind the thick trunks of ancient oaks, muscles taut, heart hammering against her ribs. After 10 years of solitude, of building walls of independence around herself, she now faced a presence that stirred emotions she had long buried, emotions she had convinced herself she no longer possessed. The Alpha King moved with the silent authority of one who commanded not just armies but fate itself. Even without the roar of a court or the presence of his guards, he radiated power. It was not just strength in the physical sense, it was dominance, focus, and an almost tangible aura of inevitability. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate, each footfall resonating with the weight of experience, regret, and a longing that had not diminished over the years. Her gaze met his before she could turn away. The air between them seemed to thrum, charged with a tension that made her breath catch. 10 years apart, yet the memory of his presence, his gaze, lingered as vividly as if it had happened only yesterday. She remembered the first time she had seen him, the cold authority, the unyielding power, and the strange, fleeting softness that had flashed in his eyes before duty and pride had reclaimed him. Now, in the dappled light of the forest, she saw the same eyes, sharpened and wiser, yet carrying a depth of emotion that startled her. He paused, scanning the forest, and for a moment, she thought he had not seen her. But then his gaze found hers, and in that instant, the years collapsed into silence. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The weight of everything left unsaid, every moment of longing, every pang of regret, every shadow of the past, hung between them, unbroken by time. The wind stirred, brushing against her skin, carrying the scent of him, familiar and commanding, unmistakably alpha. Her instincts, honed over a decade of survival, screamed at her to retreat, to vanish once more into the shadows. Yet she remained, rooted to the spot by the force of recognition and he inspoken understanding that this was no ordinary encounter. This was a reckoning, and it had been a decade in the making. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in concentration. He did not speak. He did not move forward. He simply observed, taking in the sight of her as though committing every detail to memory, the curve of her shoulders, the strength in her stance, the subtle grace that had not been diminished by the years of solitude. She had changed, grown into a woman both delicate and resilient, yet he could see the omega beneath the layers of survival, the spark that had drawn him to her so long ago. For her part, she felt a tumult of emotions she struggled to contain. Anger, caution, curiosity, and an undeniable pull toward the man who had once been a symbol of authority and now seemed like a shadow of her own past, simultaneously threatening and familiar. Her instincts urged her to flee, but her heart hesitated. Something about him, the unmistakable aura of his presence, demanded attention, demanded confrontation. Minutes stretched into a fragile eternity as they simply regarded each other, the forest around them alive yet subdued, as if it too waited for the inevitable next move. Every instinct, every memory, every unspoken word built the tension between them, thickening the air until it seemed almost visible. It was a moment suspended between past and present, fear and longing, isolation and reunion. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured, carrying the weight of authority tempered by the softness of memory. "I never forgot," he said, each word deliberate, resonant. The sound of his voice sent a shiver down her spine, stirring something deep within her that had lain dormant for 10 years. She swallowed, resisting the urge to turn and vanish into the shadows she had come to trust more than any human presence. Instead, she met his gaze fully, steadying herself. "And yet," she replied softly, "you are here." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm she had cultivated for so long. There was no accusation, no plea, just the quiet acknowledgement of reality. the undeniable fact that fate had brought him to her, to this moment, after a decade of separation. The forest seemed to exhale as he took a step closer, careful, measured, but deliberate. His presence filled the space around her, and yet he did not crowd, did not force. There was respect in his approach, a recognition that the Omega before him was not the girl who had fled 10 years ago, but a woman tempered by solitude, capable of standing alone, yet profoundly human in her strength and vulnerability. She realized, then, that this encounter would change everything. It was not just a reunion. It was the crossing of paths shaped by fate, pain, longing, and resilience. The air between them pulsed with unspoken possibilities, the chance for understanding, for forgiveness, for connection that had once seemed impossible. As the first true interaction in a decade stretched before them, both of them knew, silently and irrevocably, that nothing would ever be the same. The forest, witness to a decade of isolation, now became the stage for a reunion that had been written long before either of them had understood its inevitability. And in that still, golden light, as the leaves whispered their approval and the shadows deepened, the Omega and the Alpha King stood facing each other. Two lives converging after 10 years, each carrying the weight of the past, each on the brink of a future neither could yet fully comprehend. The forest seemed alive with anticipation, each rustle of leaves and distant bird call echoing the tension that hung between them. The Omega stood rigid, yet not from fear. She was no longer that frightened girl who had fled into the night 10 years ago. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, remained fixed on the Alpha King, who now stood mere paces away, radiating the same commanding presence she had remembered, but tempered by years of experience, longing, and perhaps regret. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft sigh of the wind weaving through the pines, a melody that felt as though the forest itself were urging them to speak, to reconcile, to bridge the decade of silence that had stretched between them. Finally, he broke the stillness, his voice calm but carrying the weight of everything left unspoken. "You've changed," he said. There was no accusation, no surprise, only observation, a quiet acknowledgement of the years etched into her posture, her eyes, her very presence. 10 years, you've survived. Thrived, even. She met his gaze, her own eyes wary yet steady. "I had no choice," she replied softly. "The world abandoned me, but the forest didn't. It gave me what you and your people could not." Her words carried both gratitude and a subtle sting, a reminder of the pain she had endured, the rejection that had marked her as unworthy. Yet even as she spoke, she felt a flicker of curiosity, a pull she had resisted for a decade, an unspoken need to hear why he had come, to understand the Alpha King who had once watched her leave with silent power. He nodded slowly, understanding the layers behind her words. "I searched for you," he said. "Every year, every season. I never stopped looking. And now, I've finally found you." His voice, firm and unwavering, bore the weight of truth, and in it, the Omega sensed something she had long denied. He had cared, even when duty and pride demanded otherwise. The forest seemed to lean closer, the golden sunlight filtering through the trees creating patterns of warmth and shadow on the forest floor. It was as if nature itself were celebrating this reunion, acknowledging that the moment they had both unknowingly awaited had arrived. She took a cautious step forward, her instincts urging her to flee even as curiosity and the faint stirrings of something long buried urged her closer. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after 10 years?" The words trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the vulnerability she had long denied herself. The question carried more than curiosity, it carried the weight of betrayal, the longing for understanding, and the fragile hope that he might finally provide answers. The Alpha King studied her, his expression unreadable yet softened by a depth of emotion she had never seen before. "Because I realized, I cannot command the world and ignore what my heart knows," he said quietly. "I thought I had lost you. I thought the world had taken you from me. But here you are, and I will not let another decade pass without knowing the truth between us." Her breath caught. The truth. The very words stirred memories she had tried to bury, the fleeting moments of recognition, the unspoken connection, the spark of something neither of them had understood when they were young. 10 years of separation, 10 years of silence, had not dimmed that spark. It had only smoldered, waiting for the right moment to ignite once more. For a long moment she said nothing, considering him, measuring the sincerity in his eyes, the authenticity in his voice. She had been hurt before, rejected, abandoned, not just by him, but by a society that refused to accept her. And yet, here he stood, vulnerable in his own way, reaching across the chasm of years and mistakes. Finally, she spoke, her voice firm yet tinged with emotion. "Do you understand what I've endured?" The question hung between them, heavy and raw, carrying the weight of 10 years of survival, isolation, and resilience. "Do you know what it's like to be rejected by the very world that should have protected you?" He stepped closer, the aura of authority softening into something more human, more vulnerable. "I do now," he said simply. "And I understand that finding you is only the beginning. If you allow me, I want to make it right. Not to erase the past, but to stand with you now, to honor the life you've built and the woman you've become." Her gaze softened slightly, though caution still lingered. The forest, silent and patient, seemed to watch them, the gentle sway of branches mirroring the fragile dance of trust between them. For the first time in 10 years, she felt a tentative thread of hope, fragile yet undeniable, weaving its way through the wounds of her past. The Alpha King reached out, not to claim, not to command, but to offer a gesture of connection, a bridge between their lives, forged by time, longing, and shared destiny. She did not move immediately, but her eyes held his, searching, questioning, and finally, recognizing the truth that words alone could not convey. That neither time nor distance had broken the bond between them. And so, in the heart of the forest, beneath the watchful gaze of ancient trees and the golden light of dawn, they stood together, tentative yet present. 10 years of separation, 10 years of survival, and 10 years of longing had led them here. And for the first time, the Omega allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the past could be reconciled with the present, and that a future with him might be possible, built not on authority or obligation, but on understanding, respect, and the unspoken truths that had always bound them. The forest exhaled around them, leaves rustling softly as though in approval. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the first fragile threads of reunion began to weave a tapestry that would lead them, step by step, toward healing, trust, and the possibility of love that had endured a decade of absence. The forest had grown calm again, though the tension of the past hours lingered like an echo in the air. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in gentle streams, illuminating the clearing where the Omega and the Alpha King now stood. Silence reigned, but it was no longer oppressive, it was contemplative, filled with the weight of emotions neither had dared to voice until this moment. For the Omega, every sound, every movement, every subtle shift of the forest carried a dual meaning. Her instincts were sharp, honed over 10 years of solitude, yet now they contended with something new. The awareness that this Alpha, the one who had haunted her memories for a decade, was here not as a threat, but as an acknowledgement of her strength, her resilience, her very existence. She studied him cautiously, eyes tracing the lines of his face, noting the same unwavering strength tempered by a new softness, the maturity that had come with time and responsibility. She began, then faltered, unsure how to articulate the storm of thoughts and emotions that churned within her. 10 years of silence, 10 years of survival, had built a fortress around her heart, one she had believed impenetrable. And yet, standing before him, she realized how much she had missed the very human connection she had sought to flee. The Alpha King, sensing her hesitation, lowered his gaze briefly, as if gathering his own thoughts. "I do not expect forgiveness immediately," he said quietly, his voice carrying both humility and determination. "Nor do I expect you to trust me without reason. But I want you to know that I am here to listen, to understand, and to respect what you've built." Her eyes softened slightly, though caution still lingered. She had survived without him, without the village, without anyone, yet a part of her had always longed to be seen, to be understood. "I've lived a decade in this forest," she said finally. "I've built a life from what was given and what I could take from the world around me. I've learned to survive, to rely on myself, and yet, I never truly forgot what I lost, or who abandoned me." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words, the gravity of her experience pressing against him like a tangible force. "I cannot change what was done to you," he admitted. "Nor can I undo the years of solitude you endured. But I can promise that I will stand with you now, if you allow me, and I will honor every choice you have made and every lesson you have learned." For the first time in years, the Omega felt a flicker of warmth, fragile yet undeniable. A bridge, tentative and delicate, was forming between them, built on the foundations of acknowledgement, honesty, and shared history. The forest, quiet witness to their reunion, seemed to embrace the subtle shift, the gentle turning of hearts that had once been distant and guarded. Slowly, she took a step forward. Not toward him fully, but into the space where the tension eased just enough to allow connection without fear. "You speak of standing with me," she said softly. "But what do you see when you look at me? Do you see the girl who fled, or the woman who survived?" The Alpha King's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I see both," he said simply. "I see the girl who deserved protection and care, yet was forced to leave. And I see the woman who has endured, who has thrived, who has become more than I could have imagined. That is the one I stand before now." Her chest tightened, emotions rising like a tide she had long held at bay. It was a recognition she had not expected, a validation of her years of struggle, of her solitude, of her resilience. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words without speaking, letting the silence itself convey what she could not yet articulate fully. Minutes stretched as they stood together, the space between them filled not with words but with understanding. Slowly, the tension that had gripped her began to ease, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Perhaps she could allow herself to let someone in, not to diminish the life she had built, but to share it with one who had come seeking understanding, not control. He extended a hand, not in command or possession, but in invitation, a gesture of trust, a symbol of his intent to bridge the years of distance. She hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his, feeling the strength in his grasp tempered by gentleness. It was a connection built on respect, forged in the fire of share. Deep pasts, and illuminated by the possibility of what could come. The forest around them seemed to exhale, the light through the trees glinting on their hands, as if blessing the fragile bond forming between them. For the first time in a decade, the Omega allowed herself to believe that she was not alone, that the Alpha King, once a symbol of authority and fear, could now be a companion, a protector, and perhaps, in time, something more. And as the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the faint scent of change and possibility, both of them knew that the path ahead would be delicate, fraught with challenges, but filled with the promise of trust, healing, and the slow rebuilding of a connection that had endured time and absence. In the heart of the forest, beneath the golden light and the watchful eyes of ancient trees, a tentative alliance had been forged. A bridge of trust had begun to span the gap of 10 years, and with it came the first glimmers of hope, of reconciliation, and of the love that had silently waited, ready to bloom in the patient shadows of the forest. The forest, which had long been a sanctuary for the Omega, now seemed to hum with tension. Though she had begun to allow the Alpha King into the delicate space she had carved for herself, the past, with its sharp edges and lingering pain, refused to remain silent. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig beneath unseen feet, seemed to echo the memories she had tried to bury, memories of betrayal, rejection, and abandonment. She moved through the forest with a measured pace, her senses heightened by years of vigilance. Even as she walked beside the Alpha King, now more a presence of trust than threat, a part of her remained wary, a sentinel against the possibility of further hurt. He sensed it too, though he did not voice it. Instead, he matched her pace, observing without intrusion, allowing her the space she required to navigate both the forest and the fragile new bridge of trust between them. The morning sunlight sifted through the trees in golden threads, illuminating her path and highlighting the subtle strength she had cultivated over a decade of solitude. Her hands brushed against the rough bark of ancient trees, grounding herself in the familiar textures of the forest. She had built this life from necessity, carving survival and peace from the raw wilderness. And now, this life, carefully constructed and fiercely protected, was intersecting with his presence, bringing with it both comfort and apprehension. He watched her closely, the Alpha King attuned to the smallest cues of tension, curiosity, or hesitation. He had long been a master of reading the intentions of others, yet she remained a mystery even to him after 10 years apart. There was no pretense here, no facade. Only raw resilience and vulnerability intertwined, a combination that commanded both respect and awe. As they moved deeper into the forest, the faint scent of smoke reached them, carried on the wind. She stiffened instinctively, signaling him to halt. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the distance. "Someone's here," she whispered, her voice low but steady. The forest had always been her ally, and its subtle warnings had never failed her. The Alpha King's gaze sharpened. "Enemies or wanderers?" he asked quietly, already stepping into a protective stance beside her. "Could be either," she replied, tension threading her words. "But we should approach with caution." Her heart, though steady, betrayed a faint thrill, the adrenaline of facing danger alongside someone she had once feared, but now trusted, in some measure. They moved with silent coordination, each step deliberate, each movement precise. The rustle of leaves beneath their feet was careful, measured, as they navigated the forest toward the source of the smoke. Shadows shifted around them, the sunlight now fractured by the dense canopy, creating a labyrinth of light and darkness. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to press in, as if testing their resolve, as if reminding them that even trust and connection could be challenged by the lingering echoes of the past. Finally, they reached a small clearing, where the remnants of a fire smoldered, sending tendrils of smoke curling into the sky. Charred pieces of wood and ash marked the spot, and nearby, footprints, some fresh, some older, muddled the soil. She knelt to examine them, noting the direction and the subtle impressions left behind. "They came through recently," she murmured. "And they didn't linger long. Whoever they were cautious, but not afraid." Her eyes lifted to him, alert, assessing. "Could be hunters, bandits, or worse, someone searching for me, for the forest's secrets." He nodded, placing a protective hand near her shoulder, not touching, but signaling presence and readiness. "Then we proceed carefully," he said. "Together." His words, simple yet resolute, carried a promise, a pledge that he would not let the past dictate this moment, that he would stand with her against whatever threat emerge. As they prepared to continue, she felt a subtle shift in her perception, the forest's whispers, the wind's sighs, the faint rustle of distant branches. Something was approaching, unseen but undeniable. The hairs on her arms rose, her instincts, finely tuned over a decade, screamed at her to prepare. Yet, for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. The Alpha King was beside her, silent, vigilant, his presence a grounding force. The shadows around them deepened, folding into the clearing like living entities. And just beyond the trees, a figure emerged, unfamiliar, cloaked, and moving with deliberate intent. The Omega's pulse quickened, but not from fear alone. There was recognition in the way her body responded, a readiness honed by years of survival. She glanced at him, and in his eyes, she saw the same intensity mirrored, an understanding that the past was never truly gone, and that the challenges they faced now would test not only their strength but their trust, their bond, and the fragile connection they had begun to rebuild. The forest seemed to hold its breath once more, as if aware that this encounter would be a turning point. And in that moment, the Omega realized that the path to reconciliation, to trust, and perhaps to love, would not be simple. The past had not fully released its grip, and shadows lingered in corners she had once thought safe. Yet, for the first time in 10 years, she faced them not alone, but with someone who had crossed the decade of silence to stand with her, steady, unwavering, and willing to face the unknown together. The figure stepped forward, the firelight glinting on a weapon. The forest's tension thickened, and the Omega drew herself into a stance she had perfected over 10 years of survival. The Alpha King mirrored her movements, his gaze locked on the intruder, ready to act, to protect, to face whatever threat this shadow of the past might bring. And so, in the heart of the forest, amidst light and shadow, past and present, the first true test of their renewed alliance began. A trial that would challenge not only their strength, but the trust they were only just beginning to forge. The forest was no longer merely a sanctuary. It had become a battlefield of trust, of past wounds, and of the fragile bond that had begun to form between the Omega and the Alpha King. The intruder, a shadow from unknown origins, had tested their vigilance, forcing them to move as one, relying not only on instinct but on the unspoken understanding that had been slowly growing between them. Every glance, every subtle movement, reinforced the truth neither could ignore. They were no longer solitary entities in this world. They were a unit, bound by circumstance, history, and the fragile threads of trust. The Omega's heart still pounded from the encounter with the mysterious figure, yet a calm determination ran beneath it, a confidence she had earned through years of survival. She had faced countless dangers alone in the forest, yet the presence of the Alpha King beside her transformed fear into strategy. There was a rhythm to their movements now, a silent dialogue that allowed them to anticipate each other's actions without words. It was a dance of strength and precision, forged not in courtly politics or battlefields, but in the shared vulnerability. Tie and respect of two beings who had both been shaped by time and loss. After the intruder disappeared into the shadows, leaving only subtle signs of retreat, they paused in the clearing. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest reminder that the world beyond the forest still existed, and that not all threats came from outside these protective boundaries. Yet neither of them spoke immediately. Words were unnecessary, the tension of the moment had conveyed everything they needed. Finally, the Omega broke the silence. "It's not just the intruder," she said softly, her gaze distant, reflecting memories she had not shared with anyone for a decade. "It's what I've carried inside me. The fear, the abandonment, the rejection. It never truly leaves." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the depth of vulnerability she had long concealed beneath her strength. The Alpha King stepped closer, his presence grounding, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I know," he said quietly. "I can't erase the past, and I can't undo what you endured. But I can stand beside you now. You've survived 10 years without me, and yet here you are, unbroken. That strength, it's remarkable. And it's yours." Her eyes softened, though her heart still held a cautious barrier. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did 10 years of searching do to you? Did it change you?" He hesitated, as if weighing the enormity of a decade spent longing and hoping. "It did," he admitted finally. "Every year, I thought of you. Every season, I wondered if you were alive, if you were safe. And every night, I wished I could have done more, said more. The years have taught me patience, humility, and the importance of listening, truly listening. And now, I know that finding you is not the end. It's the beginning of understanding, of rebuilding what was lost, one careful step at a time." The forest seemed to respond to their words, the light filtering through the canopy warmer, softer, as if acknowledging the delicate healing taking place. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a subtle spark of hope she had not allowed herself in years. Trust was fragile, like a sapling swaying in the wind, yet she could feel it growing between them, nurtured by honesty, patience, and the unspoken acknowledgement of shared pasts. They moved together deeper into the forest, exploring paths she had once walked alone. Now, each step was shared, each choice mutual. The Alpha King did not lead, he walked beside her, offering guidance when needed, but never overriding her decisions. The Omega, in turn, allowed herself to feel a security she had long denied, sensing in his presence not domination, but partnership. As dusk approached, they reached a secluded glade, where a small waterfall fed a crystal-clear pool. The water shimmered in the fading light, reflecting the sky and the towering trees above. She knelt at the edge of the pool, dipping her hands into the cool water, letting the gentle current wash away some of the tension that had built within her. He knelt beside her, not touching, but close enough that the warmth of his presence was undeniable. For a long moment, they simply sat together in silence, letting the rhythm of the forest and the flowing water soothe the residual anxiety. Words were unnecessary. The shared space, the quiet understanding, conveyed more than speech ever could. And in that stillness, the Omega allowed herself to recognize a profound truth: she was no longer alone. For the first time in 10 years, she could imagine a life where trust was not a gamble, where companionship did not equal danger, and where love, fragile and tentative, could bloom again. The Alpha King watched her, his gaze softening as he observed the resilience and grace she carried. "You've endured so much," he said quietly, almost reverently. "And yet here you are, still capable of hope, of connection. That is what makes you remarkable." She looked up at him, the faintest smile touching her lips. "And you," she said, "are learning that sometimes strength is not just in command or power, but in patience, understanding, and the courage to stand beside someone without forcing them to follow." A subtle silence fell between them, rich with meaning. The trials of the past, rejection, solitude, and fear, had not disappeared, but they had become shared burdens, eased by the presence of someone who truly understood. And in that moment, the Omega and the Alpha King began to see a path forward, one forged not just by destiny, but by trust, resilience, and the fragile yet undeniable possibility of love. As night fell, stars peeking through the canopy above, they remained in the glade, side by side, their shared silence a testament to the bond growing between them. The forest, once a place of isolation and survival, had become a sanctuary for healing, connection, and the quiet beginning of a future neither had dared to imagine a decade ago. The first light of morning broke gently across the forest canopy, spilling golden rays onto the earth below, illuminating every leaf, every stone, every hidden path that had been a witness to a decade of solitude, struggle, and survival. The Omega stood at the edge of her sanctuary, the hollow beneath the great oak now feeling different, warmer, fuller, alive with possibility. She breathed in the crisp morning air, feeling a sense of peace she had not known in 10 long years. She was no longer just a survivor of the forest. She was whole, strengthened not only by solitude but by the presence of Somio. Nay, who had come to honor her life, her choices, and the woman she had become. The Alpha King approached quietly, his steps soft on the moss-covered ground. His gaze lingered on her, filled not with authority, but with awe and tenderness. 10 years of searching, 10 years of longing, had led him to this moment, not a triumph of conquest, but a reunion of hearts and souls. The years had changed them both, yet the connection that had first sparked in their youth remained, tempered now with understanding, respect, and trust. "You're ready," he said softly, a note of awe in his voice. Not ready in the sense of survival or self-defense, she had been capable of fending for herself for a decade, but ready in the sense of embracing what had long been denied, companionship, acceptance, and the promise of love unburdened by fear. She turned to him, a faint smile touching her lips, the same smile that had once been reserved for the rare moments of joy in her isolated life. I'm ready," she whispered, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The weight of past wounds, of rejection and solitude, had not vanished entirely, but they no longer controlled her. He stepped closer, closing the distance that had once seemed insurmountable, and extended his hand. She hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her hand in his, feeling the warmth, strength, and unwavering support that radiated from him. The touch was gentle, respectful, yet filled with a promise, a vow that this time, he would not let her go. The forest seemed to respond, the leaves whispering in approval, the sunlight glinting on dew-covered branches as if blessing the fragile union forming before it. Birds began to sing once more, a chorus of life celebrating the rekindling of trust and connection. The stream nearby babbled merrily, carrying the sound of flowing water as a testament to the passage of time and the renewal of hope. "After all these years," he said quietly, "I thought I had lost you forever. And yet, here you are, stronger than I ever imagined, and yet still, you." His voice faltered slightly, betraying the depth of emotion he had carried in silence for a decade. "I promise, from this day forward, I will be here, not as a king, not as a ruler, but as someone who sees you, truly sees you, and will stand by you through everything." Tears welled in her eyes, but not from sorrow. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of hope finally allowed to bloom after years of neglect. She squeezed his hand gently, anchoring herself to the moment, to the trust, to the bond that had been years in the making. "And I promise," she said softly, "to allow myself to be seen, to let someone share this life with me, not to control it, but to walk beside me. Together." He nodded, a rare, genuine smile lighting his features, the kind that spoke of relief, joy, and the quiet triumph of love over time and hardship. And as the sunlight strengthened, casting long, golden beams across the clearing, they both knew that the trials of the past, the rejection, the solitude, the fears, had been necessary, shaping them into who they were meant to be. And now, they were ready to begin the next chapter, together. They moved toward the heart of the forest, side by side, their hands intertwined, each step symbolizing the bridge between past and present. Every tree, every leaf, every whisper of the wind seemed to guide them forward, celebrating the harmony of two lives finally reunited. She felt a profound sense of safety, of belonging, not because the forest demanded it, but because he had chosen to stand with her, willingly, patiently, and without reservation. Hours passed in shared silence, laughter, and conversation, as if they were rediscovering each other, piece by piece, layer by layer. The forest, once a place of isolation and survival, had become a sanctuary of renewal, of connection, and of hope. Every sound, the birds, the stream, the rustle of leaves, was a reminder that life continued, that joy was possible, and that love, once tested and tempered, could endure. As twilight approached, the forest bathed in soft hues of amber and rose. He turned to her, eyes shining with quiet determination. "No matter what comes next," he said, "we face it together. You are no longer alone." She rested her head briefly against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence, the promise of a future they could build together. "And neither are you," she whispered. "We're finally together." The wind sighed through the trees, carrying the scents of the forest and the sound of life in harmony. For the first time in a decade, they both allowed themselves to hope, to dream, and to embrace a love that had waited patiently through years of separation, trials, and growth. As the night settled, stars beginning to glimmer through the canopy, the Omega and the Alpha King stood together, hand in hand, hearts intertwined, ready to face the world, not as king and subject, not as pursuer and fugitive, but as equals, companions, and soulmates. And in the quiet majesty of the forest, under the watchful gaze of ancient trees and the silver glow of moonlight, a new chapter began, a chapter of trust, healing, love, and forever. The past had shaped them. The forest had protected them. And now, together, they would embrace a future of endless possibilities, bound not by fear, but by devotion, understanding, and a love that had endured the test of time. The first light of morning spilled over the forest canopy, bathing every leaf, stone, and hidden path in a golden glow. For 10 years, the Omega had called this forest her sanctuary, her refuge from a world that had rejected her. But now, standing at the edge of her home, she felt something new stirring within her, a sense of hope, of possibility, and of a future she could finally share. The Alpha King approached silently, his gaze never leaving her. 10 years had passed, and yet the connection between them remained, unbroken and undeniable. Time had changed them both, shaped them with experiences, solitude, and longing, but it had not diminished the bond that fate had first forged in their youth. "You're ready," he said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and reverence. Not ready in terms of survival, she had spent a decade mastering the forest, but ready to embrace connection, to allow herself to trust, to feel again. She turned to him, a smile touching her lips, fragile yet genuine. "I think I'm ready," she whispered. The weight of the past, the rejection, the solitude, the pain, was still there, but it no longer held power over her. He extended his hand, not with command, but with invitation. She hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her hand in his, feeling the warmth, strength, and quiet devotion that radiated from him. It was a touch that promised safety, respect, and partnership, the kind she had longed for without even realizing it. The forest seemed to exhale, leaves rustling softly as though in blessing. The golden light of dawn danced across their entwined hands, celebrating the fragile bridge of trust that had been built over years of absence and hardship. Birds began to sing, and the nearby stream gurgled in harmony, nature itself acknowledging their reunion. "After all these years," he murmured, "I thought I had lost you forever. And yet, here you are, stronger than I could have imagined." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the depth of feeling he had carried in silence for a decade. "I promise to stand beside you, not as a king, not as an authority, but as someone who sees you, truly sees you, and will never let you face the world alone again." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of relief and joy. "And I promise," she said softly, "to let myself be seen, to share my life with someone who respects it, who walks beside me, not over me." He smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes and softened his commanding features. "Together," he said. Side by side, they moved deeper into the forest, each step a testament to the bond they had forged, one built not on obligation or authority, but on trust, respect, and love earned through patience and endurance. Every glance, every shared smile, every quiet gesture deepened the connection that had survived a decade of absence. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a hidden glade where a waterfall fed a crystal-clear pool. She knelt at the edge of the water, letting its cool embrace wash over her hands, and he knelt beside her, silent but present. In that moment, words were unnecessary. Their shared silence spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and the promise of a future nurtured together. The past, the rejection, the isolation, the fears, had shaped them, but it did not define them. The present held healing, companionship, and the slow, steady bloom of love. They sat together as the forest embraced them, the gentle babble of the stream, the rustle of leaves, and the call of distant birds blending into a symphony of renewal. As twilight approached, the first stars pierced the sky, and he turned to her, eyes glimmering with quiet devotion. "No matter what comes, we face it together," he said. She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence, and the comfort of shared destiny. Together, she whispered, her heart finally unburdened, her spirit unshackled. The forest, once a place of solitude and survival, had become a sanctuary of love, trust, and hope. And as the night deepened, under the silver glow of moonlight, they stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever life had to offer, not as Alpha and Omega in the roles the world had imposed, but as equals, partners, and soulmates. A new chapter had begun, one written not in fear or absence, but in devotion, understanding, and the enduring power of love that had waited a decade to bloom. And in the quiet majesty of the forest, beneath the watchful gaze of ancient trees and the endless sky above, they finally knew peace.